Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Everything else in between, on the outside, inside, all around. Flip mode, squad is the greatest. Remember that video for Busta Rhymes? What was it? Give me some mo. Like, I fell down and I bumped my head. And somebody asked me, "Did you bump your head?" And I said, "Yeah, flip mode. Flip mode is the greatest." It's a fun video. Check it out. Welcome, everyone, to the show. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. And I'm your host, Mike Lucht. And today is the finale of our Black Magic Academy series. All of this is essentially a pretext leading up to a sort of overarching idea that I have been building towards with this, but everything that we've discussed so far in this Black Magic Academy series, including today's episode, this is all stuff that's located closer to the forests, more primal or primeval lands and areas. This is more historical, etc. So what comes after this is essentially going to be the basically taking all of these ideas, everything we've talked about, and transporting it into modern day, although we will talk about a little bit of modern day stuff today as well, but modern day in the city, the urban metropolitan variant of a lot of the stuff we've discussed in these episodes. So, having said that, let's jump right in. The concept of the Black Magic Academy doesn't begin in any one country, nor does it belong to any one single tradition. Instead, it appears again and again, fractured across cultures, languages, and centuries, as a persistent idea. That somewhere, removed from ordinary life, there exists a place where knowledge is taught that maybe shouldn't be taught. In medieval European lore, this idea crystallizes in the legend of DOMDANIEL, a subterranean school of sorcery said to lie hidden beneath the earth, sometimes placed in Sicily, sometimes beneath the sea itself. It's not simply a place of learning, but a place of transformation, where initiates emerge altered, granted powers, or perhaps burdened by them. The term DOMDANIEL refers to a mythical sea cave or cavernous hall situated beneath the ocean, commonly portrayed as a seminary and meeting place for evil magicians, necromancers, and practitioners of black magic. The concept originates from continuations of the Arabian Nights tales, specifically in the 1788 to 1793 Arabian Tales by Dom Chavez and M. Kazot, I think that's how you say it, where it serves as a hidden academy for practitioners of the dark arts. Some scholars believe that the tale of DOMDANIEL originates from Babylonian and Persian mythology, though its definitive literary emergence appears in these European adaptations of pseudo-Arabic folklore. In Arabic folklore and the broader Middle Eastern mythological traditions that influenced its conception, the concept of DOMDANIEL is intrinsically tied to the subterranean realms often inhabited by the Marid and Ifrit, variations of the JINN. Within the framework of these legends, such a location represents more than a physical space. It's a spiritual abyss where the laws of the surface world are suspended. Local oral traditions frequently speak of the depths of the sea, or Bar al-Muhit, as a place where the barrier between the mortal world and the dimensions of the JINN is at its thinnest. This aligns with the folkloric belief that powerful sorcerers, or sahirs, would seek out isolated underwater sanctuaries to perform rituals away from the prying eyes of the faithful and the restrictive sunlight of the terrestrial world. The beliefs and practices attributed to sahir, or Arabic sorcerers, represents a complex intersection of folk magic, religious prohibition, and interaction with non-human entities. Within Islamic tradition, the practice of sihr, or sorcery, is explicitly condemned, yet the belief in its effectiveness remains widespread, particularly in rural and tribal communities. The sahir is understood to operate outside conventional religious frameworks, having allegedly entered into pacts with supernatural forces, most commonly the JINN. beings that exist in a parallel dimension but can interact with the human world. These pacts are said to grant the sorcerer access to powers that transcend natural laws, including the ability to influence human health, emotions, and perception through methods that are both physical and psychological in nature. Trafficking with non-human entities constitutes the core of the Sahir's alleged power. According to traditional accounts, sorcerers don't command these entities through mastery, but through coercion and contractual obligation, something that can kind of be traced back to Solomonic magic, which is largely referred to as the notary arts. The jinn, particularly those classified as Marid or Ifrit, are said to be bound through elaborate rituals involving specific incantations, symbolic diagrams, and offerings made at liminal times and places, such as midnight at the crossroads, or abandoned wells, or even desolate desert caves. These locations are believed to be thin places, where the veil between the mortal realm and the jinn's dimension is permeable. The Sahir serves as an intermediary channeling the jinn's otherworldly abilities to effect tangible change in the material world in exchange for services rendered to these entities, which might include acts of moral transgression, the provision of spiritual nourishment, or the expansion of the jinn's influence in the human realm. Shapeshifting represents one of the most feared abilities attributed to the Sahir, though it's often understood as a collaborative rather than innate power. The sorcerer doesn't typically transform themselves, but rather facilitates the jinn's ability to assume various forms, often those of animals revered or feared in local cultures, such as serpents, black dogs, or hyenas especially. The shapeshifting serves multiple purposes. It allows the jinn to move undetected through the human world, to instill terror in rivals or targets of curses, and to gather information that would otherwise be inaccessible in their true form. In some traditions, particularly those influenced by African magical practices that migrated into the Arabian Peninsula via trade routes, more extreme forms of shapeshifting are described, including the alleged ability of powerful sorcerers to supernaturally alter the appearance of humans, changing their racial or physical characteristics to facilitate deception or trafficking. These accounts, though found primarily in folk traditions rather than formal magical texts, reflect deep-seated anxieties about identity, authenticity, and the violation of natural boundaries. The mysterious ghost lights, known in Arabic folklore as An-Nar al-Qadra, or the Green Fire, or sometimes simply as Aisha, or Living Lights, are frequently associated with activities of Sahir and their jinn familiars. This luminous phenomena is described as hovering or moving orbs of light that appear in desolate areas, particularly near cemeteries, ruins, or bodies of water, locations believed to be portals or gathering places for supernatural entities. Unlike the will-o'-the-wisp of European folklore, which is typically seen as a malevolent force leading travelers astray, these Arabic ghost lights are sometimes interpreted as manifestations of jinn themselves, or as the visible residue of magical operations. Sahir are said to use these lights as beacons to mark locations of power, as signals to their supernatural allies, or as a byproduct of rituals that temporarily thin the barrier between dimensions. The appearance of these lights is often considered an omen, with their color, patterns of movement, and location believed to convey specific messages about the nature of the magical work being performed. The concept of hotspots for concentrated anomalous phenomena is deeply embedded in the geographical magical thinking of the Middle East and North Africa. Certain locations are consistently identified across folk traditions as being particularly prone to supernatural activity, and therefore especially valuable for magical operations. These include natural formations with unusual characteristics, caves with strange acoustics, wells with brackish water, rock formations that resemble human or animal forms, and oases that appear and disappear in cycles. Man-made structures can also become hotspots through repeated ritual use or a traumatic history, particularly places where violence has occurred or where practitioners of dark magic were allegedly defeated or contained. The Sahir is believed to possess special knowledge for identifying these locations through divination, astronomical observation, and consultation with their jinn familiars. Once identified, these hotspots are marked and protected through a series of talismans, sacrifices, and periodic rituals designed to maintain the permeability of the veil between realms and ensure the continued cooperation of resident entities. The practices of the Sahir in these anomalous hotspots typically involve elaborate preparations designed to create a temporary space where normal physical and spiritual laws are suspended. These operations often incorporate elements that mirror or parody Islamic rituals, citing verses from the Quran backwards, performing cleansings with polluted water, or praying facing away from the Kaaba in order to demonstrate rejection of conventional religious authority and allegiance to alternative powers. The tools employed in these rituals are often objects that have themselves been exposed to supernatural forces, mirrors that have reflected jinn, daggers that have shed blood, or stones that have fallen from the sky. The sorcerer's body becomes a conduit for these energies, often marked with tattoos, scars, or temporary incisions that serve as both channels and contracts for the forces being invoked, somewhat reminiscent of stories involving alien implants. These practices, while varying regionally, consistently emphasize the violation of natural boundaries between purity and impurity, human and animal, life and death, as the source of magical power. The relationship between Sahir and their non-human allies is characterized by a constant tension between the benefits and dangers. While jinn provide access to supernatural knowledge and abilities, they're also believed to resent their servitude and to constantly seek opportunities to turn the tables on their human masters. Wonder why. This dynamic creates a precarious existence for the sorcerer, who must maintain their authority through increasingly extreme acts of transgression, while simultaneously protecting themselves from betrayal. The most powerful Sahir are said to eventually undergo a form of spiritual assimilation, losing their human nature entirely and becoming something hybrid, neither fully human nor fully jinn, but a liminal being existing permanently at the threshold between worlds. This transformation is the ultimate goal of many dark magical traditions, representing not just the acquisition of power, but the transcendence of human limitations and vulnerabilities through the embrace of an alien, non-human consciousness. Some of these transitory stages between human and the other are considered to be prerequisites for potential entry into DOMDANIEL. In certain versions of the legends surrounding DOMDANIEL, the halls are often described as being constructed from black marble and coral, illuminated by perpetual unholy fires that don't consume oxygen, symbolizing a perversion of the natural order. Furthermore, the lore surrounding these oceanic caverns often intersects with the figure of Iblis, essentially the Islamic equivalent of Satan or Lucifer, with the DOMDANIEL functioning as a terrestrial embassy for diabolical forces. Traditional storytelling suggests that this location wasn't merely a school, but a site of profound spiritual inversion, where the sacred geometry used in mosque construction was mirrored and corrupted to channel chaotic energies. The scholars of these dark arts were said to undergo a re-baptism in the briny depths, trading their humanity for extended lifespans and the ability to command the elements. This mythological foundation posits the DOMDANIEL as a necessary counterweight to the celestial spheres, a place of absolute seclusion where the pursuit of power is unchecked by moral consequences, echoing the ancient Babylonian themes of the Abzu, or abyssal plane of deep waters that preceded the creation of existence. In the realm of modern high strangeness research, the traditional folkloric understandings of the jinn, beings of smokeless fire, or plasma perhaps, described in Islamic cosmology, has undergone a profound reinterpretation as a potential ultra-terrestrial or interdimensional intelligence. Unlike the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, which posits that unidentified aerial phenomena originate from distant planets, the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis suggests that these entities are indigenous to Earth but inhabit a superspectrum or world of similitude, also known as Alam al-Mithal, that exists parallel to our own. Alam al-Mithal often translates as the imaginal world or world of similitudes. It's an intermediate metaphysical realm in Islamic cosmology and Sufism. It acts as a bridge between the physical material world, or Alam al-Ajsam, and the purely spiritual or mental realm, known as Alam al-Arwah. It's the realm of living images, archetypes, and visions accessed through dreams or active imagination. Researchers like John Keel and Jacques Vallée have noted that the reported characteristics of the jinn, such as their ability to shapeshift, their deceptive nature, and their historical role as tricksters in human affairs, perfectly mirror the elusive and often absurd behavior documented in modern UFO and cryptid encounters. These sources argue that what we perceive as aliens today may simply be the latest mask worn by the jinn to interact with humanity, adapting their appearance to fit the technological expectations of our current era. Though, just to be fair, it should be noted that not all jinn are of an inherently deceptive or malevolent nature. This jinn hypothesis extends specifically into the depths of our oceans, where the ancient concept of the DOMDANIEL finds a startling modern parallel in the study of unidentified submerged objects, or USOs. In Islamic and Arabic folklore, the jinn are frequently described as ocean divers, who inhabit the desolate and lightless regions of the sea, often establishing kingdoms in the watery abyss that remain hidden from human sight. Modern UAP investigators have increasingly focused on transmedium craft that transition seamlessly between the atmosphere and the ocean, leading to theories that non-human intelligences, aka NHI, LOL, IMHO, may maintain deep-sea bases far beyond the reach of human sonar. When viewed through this lens, the mythical DOMDANIEL, a subterranean sea cave of magicians and dark knowledge, is no longer just a literary device, but a proto-description of a high-tech, subaquatic facility. These underwater UFO bases could represent a physical or interdimensional bridge between the terrestrial world and the jinn's domain, positioning the ocean floor as the primary staging ground for the high strangeness that permeates our reality. DOMDANIEL gained prominence through its central role in Robert Southey's 1801 epic poem, Thalaba the Destroyer, which established it as a significant element in Romantic literature's engagement with occult themes. In Southey's work, the cavern serves as the epicenter of forbidden knowledge and ritualistic gatherings that drive antagonistic plots, representing the moral opposition between light and darkness through magical conflicts between benevolent forces and dark sorcery. The name itself appears to derive from Arabic roots, with Dom possibly relating to demon or demonic, and Daniel potentially referencing the biblical figure associated with wisdom and dream interpretation, creating an ironic juxtaposition that emphasizes the corruption of knowledge. The concept evolved significantly in later literary traditions. Herman Melville referenced the myth of DOMDANIEL in Moby Dick, while Thomas Love Peacock's Gothic novel Nightmare Abbey also delved into themes of dark magical practices, including the lore of DOMDANIEL. T.H. White further adapted the concept in The Once and Future King, portraying the wizard Merlin as having studied magic at the DOMDANIEL, reimagining it as a structured institution for sorcery that prefigured the trope of rival or villainous magic schools in later fantasy literature. Contemporary works have continued to adapt the DOMDANIEL concept. Recently canceled comic book and fantasy author Neil Gaiman incorporated it as a cavernous headquarters for the Spanish Inquisition in his graphic novel Marvel 1602, reimagining it as a secretive European base for Inquisition forces tied to supernatural intrigues. In occult traditions, DOMDANIEL is mentioned in many medieval grimoires as a center of magical learning, symbolizing hidden knowledge or the unconscious mind. The cavern is commonly associated with dark mystical practices, including necromancy. This portrayal reflects the broader historical pattern during the early modern period in Europe, when witchcraft came to be seen as part of a vast diabolical conspiracy of individuals in league with the devil. The physical descriptions of DOMDANIEL in literature consistently emphasize its remote, concealed nature and connection to the elemental forces of water and darkness. It's depicted as a place where initiates emerge transformed, granted powers or perhaps burdened by them, through instruction in forbidden arts that blur the boundary between the natural and supernatural. This transformational aspect aligns with broader occult traditions that view magical instructions as fundamentally altering the practitioner's relationship with conventional reality and morality. The enduring appeal of the DOMDANIEL concept lies in its embodiment of the persistent human fascination with forbidden knowledge and the idea that somewhere, removed from regular ordinary life, there exists a place where dangerous transformative instruction occurs. This archetype resonates across cultures because it addresses fundamental questions about the relationships between power, morality, and the pursuit of knowledge that transcends conventional boundaries. The DOMDANIEL tradition represents a complex symbolic system that continues to evolve while maintaining its core associations with hidden learning, moral ambiguity, and the transformative potential of occult knowledge. What makes DOMDANIEL significant is not whether it ever existed as a physical location, but how closely it resembles later traditions across the world. The pattern is already present: a remote or concealed site, a lineage of forbidden instruction, and an association with phenomena that blurs the boundary between the natural and supernatural. As we move eastward, this pattern doesn't disappear. It becomes more detailed, more localized, and, arguably, more entangled with places that are still treated as anomalous to this very day. In ancient China, the closest analog to the European Sorcery Academy may not appear as a single institution, but as a network of practitioners known as Fangshi, ritual specialists, alchemists, exorcists, mediums, and technicians of the unseen. These figures operated in the margins of society, sometimes patronized by emperors, other times dismissed as dangerous or fraudulent. Quacks, even. Kooks, cranks, maybe. Yet what distinguishes the more esoteric traditions attributed to the Fangshi is their apparent connection to specific geographic centers, places where their practices were believed to be amplified. One such location is Mount Longhu, long associated with early Taoist movements, talismanic magic, and ritual authority. While later history frames Longhu as an orthodox religious site tied to the Taoist Celestial Masters sect, earlier, more ambiguous traditions hint at something less regulated, an environment where ritual technology, trafficking with spirits, and possibly more transgressive practices could be developed and transmitted. In some accounts, these practitioners weren't merely healers or exorcists, but individuals capable of manipulating perception, influencing weather, or interacting with entities that didn't conform to any human categories. The Fangshi, often translated as masters of esoteric techniques, represents a diverse and loosely organized class of technical specialists in ancient and medieval China who operated at the margins of both orthodox Taoism and court-sanctioned ritual practices. While some Fangshi specialized in relatively benign arts such as alchemy, divination, or medicine, others engaged in practices that were decidedly more antinomian, approaching what might be characterized as a Chinese form of black magic. These practitioners were distinguished by their willingness to manipulate supernatural forces for personal gain, power, or the harm of others, often employing methods that deliberately inverted or perverted conventional ritual practices and ethical norms. Unlike the more established Taoist priestly traditions, which typically sought harmony with cosmic forces, these transgressive Fangshi aimed to dominate and control the supernatural through coercive techniques that blurred the boundary between legitimate ritual magic and outright black magic. The darker aspects of Fangshi practice centered on what's termed guzhu, or goo magic, a particularly feared form of sorcery involving the creation and manipulation of poisonous creatures and spirits. Not to mention a personal favorite of mine, not so much as a practice, but due to the fact that I find it to be a striking metaphor for civilization as a whole. The practice of goo magic was believed to have originated among the non-Han peoples of southern China, particularly in regions corresponding to modern-day Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangdong provinces. But it was gradually adopted and systemized by Han Chinese practitioners operating outside mainstream religious traditions. The fundamental technique involved placing various venomous creatures, such as snakes, centipedes, scorpions, spiders, and toads, into a vessel and allowing them to consume each other until only one remained. This surviving creature, imbued with the concentrated venom and spiritual essence of all the others, would then be used as a magical agent to harm enemies, control others, or achieve various supernatural effects. The creation of a goo spirit was in itself a transgressive act, violating the natural order through the deliberate cultivation of lethal energies and the establishment of parasitic relationships between practitioner and their creation. The practitioners of goo magic were believed to enter into a symbiotic relationship with their creations, feeding them with their own vital energy or chi, and in return gaining access to the creature's supernatural abilities. This relationship was inherently parasitic and self-destructive, as the goo spirit would gradually consume its master's life force unless regularly fed with the blood or flesh of other humans. This vampiric dynamic represented a profound violation of the Confucian and Taoist emphasis on cultivating life and harmony, instead deliberately channeling death and dissolution for personal power. The most feared goo practitioners were said to be able to project their spirits from their bodies while asleep, allowing their goo familiars to prey on victims at great distances. These nocturnal predations were sometimes described as leaving distinctive marks on victims' bodies or draining their vital essence, leading to a wasting sickness that couldn't be explained by ordinary medical diagnosis. Once again, possible parallel to alien implants or signs of radiation sickness during encounters with certain quote-unquote spacecraft. Shapeshifting represented another transgressive practice associated with certain Fangshi traditions, particularly those influenced by shamanic traditions from China's border regions. Unlike the more orthodox Taoist traditions that viewed transformation as a spiritual process occurring through meditation and internal alchemy, these practitioners sought literal physical metamorphosis through ritual means. The fox spirit or Huli Jing cults, which persist to this very day in some of the more remote rural regions of China, despite repeated official suppression, taught techniques for either summoning or binding fox spirits or for gradually transforming oneself into a fox-like being through the consumption of specially prepared substances and the performance of secret rituals at liminal times. These practices were particularly associated with mountainous regions where fox spirits were believed to dwell, and with practitioners who lived at the margins of society, often widows, outcasts, or those who had already been accused of witchcraft. So, quite the self-fulfilling prophecy. The most extreme shape-shifting traditions were connected to what was sometimes called Pifu Jingzhu, a practice believed to have been introduced from Central Asian shamanic traditions via the Silk Road. Practitioners were said to acquire the skins of animals, particularly wolves, bears, or tigers, and through elaborate nocturnal rituals transform themselves into these creatures to travel great distances, attack enemies, or gather secret information. Unlike the more spiritualized transformations of Orthodox Taoism, these practices were explicitly physical and predatory, emphasizing the acquisition of animal attributes for violent and transgressive purposes. The transformation process was believed to be inherently dangerous, as the practitioner risked losing their human identity entirely and becoming permanently trapped in an animal form, or worse, becoming a hybrid creature belonging to neither world. The mysterious ghost lights, known in Chinese folklore as huoying, were frequently associated with the activities of these black magic Fangshi. These luminous phenomena were described as small flickering flames that appeared spontaneously in desolate locations, particularly near cemeteries, abandoned temples, or sites where violent deaths had occurred. These Chinese ghost lights were often interpreted as manifestations of spiritual energy or the visible residue of magical operations. Dark Fangshi were said to use these lights as beacons to mark locations of power, as signals to their supernatural allies, or as a byproduct of rituals that temporarily thinned the barrier between the material and spirit worlds. The appearance of these lights was often considered an omen of impending supernatural activity. The interactions between transgressive Fangshi and non-human entities extended beyond the more familiar categories of ghosts and fox spirits to include what might be characterized as cryptids or humanoids. Mountainous regions, particularly those with limited human habitation, were believed to harbor various strange beings that sometimes interacted with humans who knew the proper rituals for communication or control. The wild man, or Yeren, of central and western China, a hairy humanoid creature similar to the Bigfoot of North American folklore, were sometimes said to be captured and employed by powerful sorcerers as servants or guards. So basically think Lo Pan from Big Trouble in Little China and the monster secretly stowed away on the old Pork Chop Express at the end of the movie. These relationships were typically coercive rather than cooperative, involving the use of magical restraints, talismans, or the extraction of some vital essence from the creature to ensure its obedience. Other entities encountered by black magic Fangshi included what were sometimes called mountain spirits or shengjiao, earth spirits or tu chi, elemental beings that were neither fully animal nor fully human, but embodied the wild, untamed aspects of natural places. These spirits were believed to be particularly dangerous to ordinary humans, but could be negotiated with by practitioners who possessed the proper ritual knowledge and offerings. The most powerful Fangshi were said to establish long-term relationships with these entities, sometimes creating sacred spaces where the barrier between the human and spirit realms were permanently thin, allowing for regular communication and exchange. These relationships were inherently risky, as these spirits were believed to resent human intrusion into their domains, and might turn on their human partners if proper protocols weren't observed or the balance of exchange was disturbed. Mount Longhu, or Dragon Tiger Mountain, in Jiangxi Province, represents a particularly significant site for understanding the relationship between black magic Fangshi practices and hotspots for anomalous phenomena. While later Taoist historiography presents Longhu as the birthplace of the orthodox Way of the Celestial Masters tradition, earlier and more ambiguous sources suggest a more complex history involving multiple competing traditions and practices. The mountain's unique geology, characterized by unusual rock formations, caves, and springs with distinctive mineral properties, created an environment that was perceived as particularly conducive to supernatural activity. Local traditions recorded in both folklore collections and what were essentially the equivalent of localized almanacs described Longhu as a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and where various strange beings were regularly encountered by those who knew how and where to look. The early history of Mount Longhu before its official appropriation by the Celestial Masters sect is shrouded in ambiguity, but scattered references in unofficial histories and local chronicles hint at practices that would later be condemned as heterodox or demonic. These include references to night gatherings where practitioners engaged in rituals that inverted normal ceremonial procedures, the use of blood and other taboo substances in magical operations, and the cultivation of relationships with entities that were explicitly identified as harmful or malevolent. Some accounts mention groups of practitioners living in the more remote areas of the mountain who specialized in techniques for summoning and binding spirits, creating magical talismans of unusual power, and accessing knowledge through trance states that were induced through extreme physical deprivations or the consumption of psychoactive substances gathered from the mountain's unique flora. Personally, I'd prefer the second route, but that's just me. The anomalous phenomena reported from Mount Longhu and surrounding areas span a wide spectrum of high strangeness, suggesting that the site was perceived as a convergence point for multiple types of supernatural activity. Historical records from the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties include official reports investigating unusual lights seen hovering over the peak of the mountain, mysterious sounds emanating from caves that had no known source, and encounters with strange beings that didn't correspond to any known animal categories. These reports were typically dismissed by imperial officials as superstition or natural phenomena, but their persistence across centuries suggests a consistent pattern of unusual experiences associated with the location that was recognized by both local populations and itinerant practitioners of esoteric arts. This pattern of high strangeness isn't confined to Mount Longhu, but is part of a broader tapestry of unexplained phenomena recorded across China, particularly in its mountainous and remote regions. Historical records, meticulously cataloged by researchers like Kai-Chi Cheng, document a staggering 741 UFO incidents in Chinese historical texts between 139 BC and 1918 AD. These accounts often describe objects and lights that defy conventional explanation, such as an event during the Ming Dynasty where eyewitnesses from many provinces reported that they have all seen the same thing, with the incidents covering a vast radius of 500 kilometers or just over 300 miles. Other reports from Chinese history describe phenomena ranging from, quote, several balls of fire with the shape of a carriage covered in white veils, unquote, in 334 AD, to a, quote, fire carpet the shape of a giant egg, unquote, that sailed slowly across the sky above Nanjing in 1892. These historical accounts establish a precedent for anomalous aerial phenomena that long predates the modern UFO era, suggesting a deep cultural familiarity with such events. Beyond strange lights in the sky, Chinese folklore and historical records are replete with accounts of cryptid encounters and interactions with anomalous entities, many of which are tied to specific geographical locations, much like Mount Longhu. These include tales of the Jiangshi, or stiff corpse, a reanimated corpse that rises from the earth after 100 days, particularly in moist graves during droughts. Folk customs during the Ming and Qing dynasties involved digging up, beating, and burning these creatures to prevent them from causing harm. Sorry. It's just a little silly to me. Excuse me. Other entities are more deeply embedded in the cultural landscape, such as the benign spirits of animals like foxes, weasels, and raccoons, collectively known as Wu Jian, or the Five Spirits, which were venerated in many regions. The Hu Jian, or Fox Immortal in particular, is a subject of countless stories, with some accounts detailing its ability to ascend to the heavens and become a celestial being after immense age, a belief possibly fueled by the presence of suppressed fox spirit cults. More malevolent entities also populate the folklore, such as the Huapi Gu, a man-eating demon from the Qing dynasty literature that wears the skin of its victims to disguise its true form, and the Zhu Tiao Niao, a tin-headed bird-like creature that stole the spirit energy of children. The question that eventually arises is whether Longhu, and sites like it, functioned as a kind of diffuse academy, not in the structured sense of a school, but as a convergence point, a place where knowledge was accumulated, practitioners gathered, and the boundaries between the sanctioned ritual and forbidden techniques became increasingly difficult to define. Reports of anomalous lights, atmospheric disturbances, and strange encounters in mountainous regions across China complicates this further, suggesting that these locations may not have been selected arbitrarily, but for qualities that were perceived as inherently liminal. It's the poison shadow of the aforementioned Gu sorcery, however, that stretched far beyond China's borders, finding particularly fertile ground in Japan, where it transformed into Kodoku, or curse poison, a practice that would become deeply embedded in the nation's own traditions of black magic. The transmission was not a simple copy-paste, but a complex process of adaptation that began around the 5th and 6th centuries, when the principles of yin-yang and the 5 elements were transmitted to Japan from China alongside Buddhism and Confucianism. The Japanese derivative retained the core methodology of its Chinese predecessor, the cultivation of poisonous creatures in a sealed vessel until only one survivor remained, imbued with the concentrated essence of all the others. But it underwent significant syncretic evolution as it merged with indigenous Shinto animism and esoteric Buddhist practices. While Chinese Gu was more explicitly tied to material toxins and ethnic minorities, Japanese Kodoku incorporated a stronger emphasis on ritualized chanting, talismanic activation, and the spiritual power of words, or kotodama, creating a uniquely Japanese approach to venom-based sorcery. The practitioners of Kodoku in Japan developed specialized techniques that reflected the nation's distinct spiritual landscape. Unlike the more straightforward poison-based approach of some Chinese traditions, Japanese Kodoku rituals frequently employed mudras, or hand signs, specific incantations, and talismans known as Kodoku Fuda to activate the poisonous substances. These rituals sometimes involved the chanting of sutras or mantras in reverse, a technique linked to hijiri, holy men, who specialized in curses, representing a deliberate inversion of orthodox Buddhist practices. The Shugenja mountain ascetics, who combined elements of Buddhism, Shinto, and Taoism, incorporated Kodoku into their repertoire, sometimes framing it as a countermeasure against yokai or other curses, sometimes even as a test for initiates seeking to prove their spiritual fortitude. This integration into established esoteric traditions gave Kodoku a level of legitimacy and complexity that went beyond simple poison craft, elevating it to a sophisticated magical art within Japan's broader occult ecosystem. The supernatural lore surrounding Kodoku in Japan developed its own distinctive characteristics while retaining connections to its Chinese origins. Like Chinese Gu, Japanese Kodoku was associated with mysterious luminous phenomena, hitodama in Japan, or the Gohuo in China, often interpreted as manifestations of the cursed spirit or the souls of victims. These ghost lights were said to appear near sites where Kodoku had been performed or where victims suffered from its effects, serving as visible warnings of the invisible forces at work. The shapeshifting abilities attributed to Gu practitioners in China found parallel expressions in Japanese traditions, where Kodoku was sometimes linked to kitsune or fox spirits, as well as tanuki or raccoon dog magic. It's a thing. It's all over the place. With curses that were said to induce physical transformations or hallucinations of shapeshifters. The Kodoku spirit itself was believed to be able to transform into various animals, typically appearing in the shape of a woman or other creature, and could be used not only to harm, but also create stronger medicines through a modified version of the ritual process. If China offers us a decentralized model of magical practice, Japan provides something far more narratively explicit. In Japanese folklore, the Tengu, often described as mountain-dwelling entities with both avian and humanoid traits, aren't merely spirits or demons. In many traditions, they're teachers. They instruct warriors, monks, and wanderers in skills that blur the line between martial discipline and supernatural ability. This idea becomes anchored in a specific place, Mount Kurama. Kurama is traditionally associated with the training of Minamoto yo no Shitsune. Perfect-ish. Who, according to legend, learned swordsmanship from the Tengu themselves. But beyond this single narrative, a broader pattern emerges. Kurama as a site of hidden instruction, where knowledge is imparted by non-human intelligences within an isolated mountainous environment. This pattern mirrors the way Kodoku and other transgressive practices were often associated with specific geographical locations, mountains, remote forests, or abandoned temples, where the veil between worlds was believed to be thin, and where practitioners could access knowledge and power unavailable in more conventional settings. The historical records of Kodoku in Japan reveal its integration into various aspects of society, from court intrigues to folk practices. Heian-era court diaries, such as the Mido Kanpan Kukai, accuse courtiers of using Kodoku in political intrigues and espionage, while the Ingishiki, a book of laws and customs compiled in 927 CE, explicitly prohibits Kodoku practices. Edo period trial records, like those of Ooka Echizen no Hanji, describe Kodoku being used in samurai vendettas, highlighting its role in personal conflicts and revenge schemes. Folktales from the Izu Islands recounts Kodoku curses causing mass hysteria, requiring the intervention of Shugindo priests for exorcism and purification. These accounts demonstrate how Kodoku permeated different social strata and geographical regions, adapting its local needs and beliefs while maintaining its core identity as a potent form of venom-based sorcery. The persistence of Kodoku in Japanese culture, even as it was officially condemned, speaks to its perceived efficacy and its integration into the nation's complex magical worldview, where the boundaries between healing and harming, religion and sorcery, and human and supernatural were consistently being negotiated and redefined. It's within this liminal space where the boundaries between the tangible and the intangible blur, like the esoteric syncretism of 20th century occultist Kenneth Grant, finds its most unique expression. Grant, a quote-unquote controversial figure who broke from Aleister Crowley's thelemic orthodoxy, posited that practices like Chinese Gu sorcery and its Japanese counterpart Kodoku weren't merely folk magic, but surviving fragments of a prehistoric, non-human current he termed the Typhonian tradition. In works like Cults of the Shadow and Outside the Circles of Time, Grant reinterpreted these venom-based practices through a dark Lovecraftian lens. He argued that the ritual use of toxins, bodily fluids, and channeled entities in Gu and Kodoku was a form of, quote-unquote, protoplasmic reversion, a process that could temporarily break down the human form to allow for contact with transdimensional intelligences. For Grant, the ghost lights and strange aerial phenomena historically associated with these practices weren't mere folklore, but evidence of genuine encounters with these extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional forces. He framed the cult of the Ku as a terrestrial vertex for this cosmic current, a network of practitioners who, through their transgressive rituals, were unconsciously maintaining a channel for entities that existed outside the normal confines of space and time. This particular framework provides a narrative bridge between ancient sorcery and the modern phenomena of ufology, reinterpreting historical accounts of strange lights and shapeshifting as proto-UFO sightings and contact events. Grant's Typhonian interpretation finds a curious parallel in the lore of Japan's Tengu, the mountain-dwelling entities who, according to legend, instructed the warrior Minamoto no Yoshitsune in the arts of supernatural warfare on Mount Kurama. While mainstream folklore views the Tengu as either dangerous yokai or protectors of Buddhist doctrine, their characteristics eerily align with Grant's concept of non-human instructors. The Tengu are masters of illusion, shape-shifting, and misdirection, qualities that echo the deceptive and reality-bending nature of the entities described in Typhonian lore. Furthermore, the connection between these mountain spirits and the development of martial arts and esoteric practices extends beyond the Yoshitsune legend. The practices of the Shugenja, the mountain ascetics of Shugendo, involve deliberate acts of transgression and self-mortification in remote, liminal zones to gain magical power. These practices, which included the use of Kodoku as both a weapon and a spiritual test, share a conceptual DNA with the left-hand path techniques that Grant admired. This legacy of forbidden knowledge passed from non-human entities to human initiates in isolated mountain environments forms a direct line to the mythos of the ninja, whose shadowy arts of espionage, assassination, and illusion were often linked in popular culture to the Tengu and to forbidden esoteric practices, suggesting a historical kernel of truth where the boundaries between shamanism, martial arts, and black magic were deeply intertwined. Unlike DOMDANIEL, which is hidden beneath the earth, or Longhu, which operates within a human ritual framework, Kurama represents a hybrid model. The Academy is neither fully human nor entirely supernatural. It exists at an intersection, mediated through strange encounters. And notably, the Tengu occupy a liminal category often associated with shape-shifting, illusion, and misdirection, qualities that echo across global accounts of humanoid encounters. Modern reports of strange lights, disorientation, and unusual sensory experiences in mountainous regions of Japan add an additional layer. Whether interpreted as folklore, influencing perception, or something more anomalous, the association between location, instruction, and altered states remains consistent. Moving further west to the Himalayan region, the structure becomes more diffuse again, but no less powerful. Here, the idea of the Academy is embedded within traditions of wandering adepts, Siddhas, tantric practitioners, and shamans or yogis who pursue forms of knowledge that can be transformative, dangerous, or both. At the center of this network stands Mount Kailash, a site regarded as sacred across multiple religions, yet also is associated with a long history of esoteric practices. Unlike Kurama or Longhu, Kailash is not framed as a place of formal teaching. Instead, it functions as an axis, a point of convergence where practitioners, traditions, and myths intersect. Within certain strands of Himalayan and South Asian folklore, this includes associations with Nagas, serpentine entities often linked to hidden knowledge, subterranean realms, and control over natural forces, particularly water and the weather. In more esoteric interpretations, these beings aren't simply mythological, but part of a symbolic or experiential framework through which practitioners engage with non-human intelligences. Not to mention, there's just tons and tons of literature and multimedia that references the Nagas in relation to reptilian, aliens, and interdimensional entities, etc. What complicates this further is the reoccurring motif of isolation and transformation. Practitioners who enter these regions, whether physically, ritually, or psychically projected, etc., are often described as returning changed, possessing abilities or insights that place them outside of ordinary social structures. Combined with persistent reports of unusual lights atmospheric anomalies and disorientation in high-altitude regions, KAILASH and its surrounding areas begin to resemble less a single academy and more an entire landscape configured for initiation. This initiatory landscape is defined by a profound and pervasive high strangeness that transcends mere folklore and borders on the physically anomalous. The most fundamental mystery of Mount KAILASH is its absolute inaccessibility. Despite standing at 6,638 meters, or slightly over 2,000 feet, significantly lower than Everest, no human has ever reached its summit. This isn't for lack of trying, however. A British expedition in 1926 and a Japanese team in 2001 were forced to turn back, not by insurmountable technical challenge alone, but by sudden inexplicable illnesses, extreme weather that materialized from out of nowhere, and a series of unexplained setbacks that mountaineers could not rationalize. Ancient texts codify this prohibition, stating that, quote, "No mortal shall be allowed to walk atop Mount KAILASH, where among the clouds is the home of the gods. He who dares to start to the top of the mount to see the faces of the gods will be put to death," unquote. Those who have attempted the climb are said to have either quit, returned with quote-unquote weird experiences, or encountered bizarre after effects, with some climbers simply disappearing without a trace. This enforced sanctity has fueled speculation that goes beyond the spiritual, with some Russian scientists proposing that KAILASH isn't a natural mountain at all, but instead a massive man-made pyramid, citing its uncanny symmetry and its four perpendicular faces that align perfectly with the cardinal directions as evidence of precision engineering. Beyond the mountain's forbidden peak, the very environment around it behaves in ways that defy conventional physics. The most consistently reported phenomena involves distortions in time and space. Pilgrims completing the 52-kilometer Kora, or circumambulation, of the mountain frequently report that the journey takes less time than it should, with some shaving hours or even a full day off their expected travel time. This is often accompanied by a rapid aging process. Visitors, particularly those who remain for extended periods, have reported that their hair and fingernails grew at an accelerated pace, sometimes by several weeks' worth in just a few days. These physical changes hint at some kind of localized time dilation, leading to speculation that the area may be experiencing gravitational or temporal anomalies similar to what's described in Einstein's theory of relativity. Such effects bear a striking resemblance to the missing time phenomena reported by abductees, who often describe being aboard an alien craft for what feels like minutes, only to find out that hours or days have passed in the regular world. This suggests that Mount KAILASH may act as a natural or artificial anchor for the same gravity drive technology allegedly used by these craft. If a craft or location utilizes intense gravitational fields to warp space-time for propulsion, a byproduct would be the exact type of time distortion seen in both UFO encounters and on the slopes of KAILASH. Not to mention various fairy lore as well, all throughout Europe, where people have claimed to have walked into the quote-unquote other world or fairy dimension, only to return and find out that a significant amount of time has passed, far more time than they have perceived spending in this other place. This isn't purely folkloric belief either. Reports suggest that NASA scientists have shown interest in these accounts, hypothesizing the presence of powerful magnetic or gravitational anomalies near Mount KAILASH that could be altering human perception or even time itself. This electromagnetic interference is a separate documented mystery, with researchers reporting strange magnetic anomalies near the peak that consistently affect compasses and other navigation tools, rendering them unreliable. This axis mundi also possesses a shadow side in the left-hand path where Vama Marga and pre-Buddhist Bon practices, specifically at Rakshas Tal, the Lake of the Demon, where the demon king Ravana performed penance to gain invincible powers. Esoteric tradition suggests that the mountain's unique energy vortex allows sorcerers to command the La, or gods, and the Zu, or demons, tapping into a chronal vortex of some kind in order to harness these time warping abilities in the pursuit of their occult mastery. The landscape itself is a study in supernatural duality, most starkly represented by the two lakes at the mountain's base, Lake Mansarovar and Lake Rakshastal. Mansarovar is a vast, serene freshwater lake, circular in shape and revered by pilgrims for its purity and spiritual power, believed to cleanse the sins of a lifetime. Immediately adjacent to it lies Rakshastal, the Lake of the Demon, a saltwater crescent-shaped body of water with a lifeless, foreboding appearance. This stark contrast between a sacred, life-giving lake and a malevolent, sterile one, existing side by side in the shadow of Kailash, serves as a powerful geographical metaphor for the mountain's dual nature as a place of both immense spiritual power and profound, potentially dangerous occult forces. It's in this liminal environment where the sacred and the profane are physically juxtaposed that the most transgressive practices are believed to have been explored. The esoteric and antinomian traditions associated with Mount Kailash are deeply rooted in the region's spiritual history, often embodied by figures who transgress societal norms before achieving enlightenment. The most famous example is the 11th century Tibetan Buddhist sage Milarepa, who is a fascinating character who will eventually be getting his own episode at some point. Before becoming a revered yogi and a poet, Milarepa was a notorious black magician who, as a young man, used his mastery of destructive sorcery to murder his own uncle and aunt in revenge for their mistreatment of his family. This period of his life represents a profound engagement with the very darkest of dark arts, a path of destructive power that only through immense suffering and rigorous spiritual discipline was transformed into a force for enlightenment. His subsequent association with Mount Kailash, where he is said to have meditated in remote caves surrounded by monsters, demons, and dark spirits, and the fact that the legend holds he's the only human to have ever stood on its summit, cements the mountain's connection to a path that involves not just transcending the world, but mastering its most dangerous energies first. Milarepa's life story serves as a template for the idea that true power in this region may require a descent into darkness before an ascent into light, a journey through the shadow self facilitated by the mountain's unique energies. While specific black magic cults centered on Kailash are difficult to verify in written sources, the principles of such practices are embedded in the more extreme forms of Tibetan Buddhism and the pre-Buddhist Bon religion, which also holds the mountain sacred. The antinomian tantric traditions, for instance, can involve rituals that deliberately transgress social and moral norms to shatter conventional perception and achieve a state of non-dual awareness. These practices, while not necessarily black magic in the Western sense, operate on a similar principle of engaging with taboos and dangerous forces to gain power and insight. The connection to shape-shifting and non-human entities is also present in the lore of the region's Siddhas, or accomplished practitioners. These masters were often attributed with siddhis, or supernatural powers, which included the ability to levitate, become invisible, and change their form at will. While often framed as spiritual accomplishments, these abilities echo the shape-shifting powers of the Nagas and other elemental beings believed to inhabit the sacred landscape, suggesting a continuum of practice where the human practitioner learns to mimic and ultimately merge with the form and consciousness of the non-human intelligences that preside over the region. The persistent, though less documented, reports of strange lights and orbs seen over the mountain, similar to the Huoying of China and the Hitodama of Japan, can be interpreted within this framework as visible manifestations of these energies, or the entities themselves, a constant reminder of the active, non-human presence that animates the landscape. If the Himalayan traditions present a landscape of initiation, Central and West Africa offer something more embedded, less an isolated academy and more a distributed system of knowledge that exists within society, yet operates according to its own internal logic. Among the Azande people of Central Africa, documented extensively by E. Evans Pritchard, the concept of mangu, often translated as witchcraft, isn't simply a practice but an inherited force. It's something that resides within certain individuals, shaping their interactions with the world in ways that are often invisible, indirect, and deeply feared. Unlike the structured idea of a school, mangu does not require formal instruction in the conventional sense, and yet there are repeated references to transmission, to learning, and to the gradual realization of one's abilities, suggesting a kind of implicit academy, one that operates through lineage, initiation, and experience, rather than any subtle architecture of ritual landscapes. Those identified as possessing mangu are often associated with nocturnal activity, spiritual projection, and the ability to influence events at a distance. What makes this particularly relevant to the broader pattern is its geographic and phenomenological overlap with regions long associated with unexplained lights and encounters. The vast rainforest expanse of the Congo Basin, along with the adjacent areas of the Ubangi and Uele regions where Azande traditions are concentrated, have, across both local oral accounts and scattered modern reports, been linked to luminous phenomena appearing at night. These lights are not consistently interpreted as natural. In some traditions, they're understood as manifestations of witchcraft itself, visible traces of otherwise invisible actions. Evans Pritchard himself documented this connection in detail, noting that the Azande believe a witch's soul, or mibisimo mangu, can separate from the physical body to travel and attack a victim. This soul sails through the air emitting a bright light, a phenomenon that operates over short distances, usually at night. In a chillingly specific account, Evans Pritchard recorded witnessing such a light himself, an event that was immediately followed by the death of a man who lived in a hut directly in the light's path. According to the belief, the traveling Mibisimo Mangu reached its victim and devoured the soul of his organs, or Mibisimo Pasio, causing his death. This provides a direct documented link between a specific anomalous light, a ritualistic or magical belief system, and a disturbing fatality, framing the ghost light not as a passive spectacle, but as an active agent of harm. Within this framework, the line between practitioner and phenomena begins to blur. Accounts describe figures who move in ways that defy expectation, who appear and disappear without clear cause, or who take on animal forms, hyenas, again, leopards, or other nocturnal predators. While Western classifications might separate these into witchcraft, shapeshifting, and cryptid encounters, the local ontology doesn't always make such distinctions. They're part of the same continuum. The very mechanism of the Mibisimo Mangu allows for this ambiguity. As Evans Pritchard explains, if a known witch is physically present in their hut when an act of witchcraft occurs miles away, this is rationally explained by the fact that it's the witch's soul, not their body, that has traveled to attack the victim. This concept of spiritual projection and bilocation allows the practitioner to be in two places at once, effectively appearing and disappearing at will. This extends to the shape-shifting paradigm, where the witch's power isn't necessarily to physically transform into an animal, but to send their soul forth in the guise of one, or spiritually possessing an actual animal in some instances. A common belief in many African witchcraft traditions that aligns with the Azande conceptual framework. The hyena, in particular, is a frequent liminal figure in the folklore of the region, often depicted as a witch's familiar or a form taken by a practitioner to travel unseen under the cover of darkness, blurring the boundary between human, animal, and spirit. There are also persistent narratives of humanoid presences encountered in remote forested areas, figures that are neither fully human nor entirely animal, often glimpsed at the edge of visibility, sometimes accompanied by lights or other atmospheric anomalies. These encounters reinforce the same structural elements seen elsewhere: a specific environment, a body of hidden or restricted knowledge, and a set of phenomena that challenge conventional perception. The very geography of the Azande homeland, the Upper Nile Basin in South Sudan, stretching to the borders of the semi-tropical rainforest in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, creates a vast, sparsely documented landscape where such encounters could plausibly occur without official verification. The dense canopy, winding rivers, and historical isolation from Westerners who only began providing reliable first-hand accounts in the mid-19th century have preserved a cultural and physical environment where the supernatural is woven into the fabric of everyday life. This is a world where misfortune, from a failed harvest to a sudden illness isn't random chance, but the direct result of a malevolent force wielded by another person, a belief that persists even among those who've adopted Christianity or Islam. The darker side of this belief system manifests in social violence and ritualistic acts born from the fear of Mongu. While Evans Pritchard famously argued that the Azande response to witchcraft was rational within its own logical framework, that logic often led to deadly outcomes. The primary method for countering witchcraft was the poison oracle, a ritual where a poison was administered to a chicken to determine guilt or innocence. This process, while a form of divination, could be used to accuse and condemn individuals, leading to their execution or exile. Furthermore, the existence of black magic or sorcery, distinct from the inherited witchcraft of Mongu, implies a conscious and deliberate application of harmful techniques. This is the domain of the ngwa, or sorcerers who actively fabricate spells and medicine to harm others, combat or assault magic, in contrast to the witch whose Mongu acts perhaps even without their full knowledge. This creates a clear category for malevolent occult practitioners whose actions are intentional and transgressive. The persistence of these beliefs into the 21st century, as evidenced by ethnographic work conducted as recently as 2016, indicates that these are not merely historical curiosities, but living traditions that continue to shape social interaction, conflicts, and perceptions of reality in the region. In this sense, the Azande example and the broader network of Central African witchcraft traditions represents a different configuration of the academy model. It isn't hidden in a mountain or beneath the earth. It's diffused across a landscape, embedded within a culture, and activated through individuals. But the outcome remains strikingly familiar: transformation, secrecy, and an enduring association with lights in the darkness. Signals, perhaps, of processes that are only partially understood, whether by those who witness them or those who claim to wield them. The final case brings the pattern into the modern era, and into a context where folklore, social structure, and lived experience intersect in immediate ways. In Haiti, the BIZANGO are often described as a secret society operating within the broader framework of voodoo. While popular portrayals tend towards sensationalism, local accounts present something more complex: a network associated with justice, enforcement, and the preservation of communal order, though sometimes through methods that outsiders interpret as occult or supernatural, if not outright violent. This tradition is frequently associated with the Artibonite Valley, a region that, like the others discussed, carries its own reputation for anomalous phenomena, including reports of lights, apparitions, and unexplained encounters. Within this context, the BIZANGO are not framed as students in an academy, but as participants in a lineage, individuals who've undergone initiation into a body of knowledge that includes both ritual practice and, potentially, altered states of perception. The specific practices attributed to the BIZANGO reveal a system deeply intertwined with the control of life, death, and perception. Their most infamous practice is the creation of zombies, a process that anthropological evidence suggests is a form of social control. According to researcher Wade Davis, probably the best non-Haitian expert on voodoo, and from an anthropological standpoint at least, voodoo and zombification as it exists in Haiti, zombies are created by voodoo priests who are members of the BIZANGO secret societies, using a psychoactive powder to induce a death-like state in individuals who have violated the society's code of conduct. This isn't a random act of malevolence, but a ritualized punishment, a death sentence for serious transgressions, effectively maintaining order in communities where official justice is absent or unreliable at best. The process is profoundly psychological. As Davis notes, Haitian members of the BIZANGO sect are socialized to recognize the possibility of zombification, making them psychologically attuned to the drug's specific effects. This highlights the academy aspect of the society. Its members are initiated into a body of knowledge that allows them to both wield and understand these profound alterations of consciousness. Complementing this power over life and death is the BIZANGO's feared ability to shapeshift. In Haitian folklore, a recurring fear is that the Bizango can transform themselves into black dogs and other animals, in which form they walk the streets at night, their presence a silent, mobile threat that embodies their power as nocturnal enforcers. This ability to move between human and animal forms places them in the same liminal category as the shape-shifting witches of Central Africa or the Tengu of Japan, reinforcing the pattern of transgressive powers associated with these academies of the strange. The enforcement of the Bizango's rule isn't merely psychological, but manifests in tangible ritualistic violence and the creation of objects of power. The Bizango are described as a secret special brigade, a concept that originated in Africa and evolved in Haiti from resistance societies against French slavery into a force that comes to the fore in times of weak government oversight. They function as a hierarchical organization of nocturnal enforcers and guardians, a role that has historically put them in direct conflict with state power and, at times, in alliance with it. The brutal Duvalier dictatorship of the 20th century famously co-opted these societies, using the Bizango and others like them as shadowy enforcers to silence critics of their regime, demonstrating how their power could be channeled into political violence. If you want to know more about Papa Doc Duvalier, go back and listen to the old episode that me and the fellas did on him. It's one of our better episodes, I think, one I'm quite proud of. We all did magic in that episode, especially how the news cycle was reporting what was going on in Haiti at that time. It's very strange. Anywho, this enforcement is also expressed through their material culture. The Bizango create elaborate fetish figures, sculptures made from padded fabric, human skulls, wood, mirrors, and glass bottles that serve as physical anchors for their spiritual power. These figures aren't mere art, but potent ritual objects, described as looking like spiritual gangsters with dark red and black uniforms and a bottle in the hand or a sword or a bloody machete, a visual representation of their role as violent arbiters of supernatural law. The use of human bone, particularly skulls, directly links their power to the dead and to their authority over life and death, making the figures a terrifying embodiment of the society's capabilities. What makes this case particularly striking is its proximity to present day. Unlike DOMDANIEL or the more mythologized accounts of Tengu instructors, the Bizango exist within living memory, and yet the same structural elements persist: secrecy, transformation, geographic specificity, and an association with phenomena that resist straightforward explanations. The high strangeness of the Artibonite Valley is not confined to historical accounts, but is part of a living tradition. The fear of shape-shifting Bizango patrolling the night, the creation of zombies as a form of social sanction, and the presence of ritual objects that channel unseen forces are all contemporary beliefs reported from the region. The modern context of Haiti's instability, with gangs patrolling vast territories and a multinational security force deployed in 2024 to quote-unquote counter violence, creates a power vacuum where the authority of secret societies like the Bizango can become even more relevant. In a nation where official institutions have failed, the Bizango represent an alternative, ancient system of order, one enforced through the very real fear of supernatural violence and the manipulation of reality itself, a modern-day academy of the strange operating in the shadows of a failed state. Across these various examples, DOMDANIEL, Longhu, Kurama, KAILASH, and the Artibonite Valley, a consistent pattern begins to emerge. Each tradition describes, in its own language, a place set apart, a place where knowledge is transmitted outside of ordinary channels, a place where those who enter may encounter forces, entities, or experiences that alter them forever in very fundamental ways. At the same time, these locations aren't just mythic constructs. They're repeatedly associated with what modern terminology would classify as high strangeness. Anomalous lights, unexplained sounds, apparitions, humanoid entities, and encounters with other beings that defy easy categorization. Whether these phenomena are interpreted as environmental, psychological, cultural, or genuinely anomalous remains an open question. But their co-occurrence with traditions of hidden instruction is difficult to ignore. One possible interpretation is that the Academy isn't a literal institution, but a narrative framework, a way of encoding the experiences of entering environments that are physically and psychologically disruptive and destabilizing. Another is that these traditions preserve fragmented accounts of very real practices, carried out in locations chosen specifically for their unusual properties. And a third, more speculative possibility is that both are true. That these stories and the phenomena reinforce each other over time, creating a feedback loop that sustains the legends. What remains consistent, however, is the outcome. In every case, the individual who engages with these places and practices does not return unchanged. Whether described as enlightenment, corruption, empowerment, mutation, or delusion, the transformation is the point. And it's this, more than any other specific ritual or entity, that binds the global tradition of the Black Magic Academy to the enduring mystery of anomalous hotspots, ghost lights, shape-shifting, and encounters at the edge of human understanding. That's going to do it for this episode, folks. I hope you enjoyed this series. Like I said, this is basically setting the groundwork for what comes next. We're going to take basically all the themes explored here, and we're going to move it into modern day. Not that all of this, exists outside of modern day, but we're going to move it very much into contemporary settings, and we're going to move it very, very much into an urban setting, a city setting, deep in the heart of the megalopolis. So tune in next time. We're going to go deeper into the realms of high strangeness and deep weirdness and the outer limits of the Twilight Zone, etc. When we look at dark psychogeography, necro-megalopolymancy, and infernal geometry and architecture. I gotta say, this is some of the funnest, weirdest shit that I've researched in quite a while. And that's saying something for all the various weird shit we get into on this show. So, the way I basically got the structure of this upcoming foray into this material is it's an unofficial three-parter. More like 1, 1.5, and 2. So, what we're going to do is, we come back next time, we're going to sort of look into all these concepts that lay the groundwork and tie into much of what we've talked about here on the Black Magic Academy series. Just kind of introduce ourselves to these ideas, their origins, their techniques, practices, etc. And then, after that, we're going to take an extensive look into what I've basically just been referring to as urban cryptids. Cryptids and humanoid encounters always seem to occur out in the boonies, in BFE, wherever. It's hardly ever in the city, but they happen. They happen in our own backyards. They happen in crowded metropolitan areas filled with people everywhere. These things happen. So we're going to take a look at some of those, like cryptids and humanoid encounters that are specifically geared or anchored to a city environment or setting. And then we're going to close this examination out with a thoroughly detailed look into a famous set of historical crimes, something you've probably heard of, but we're going to take a whole new look at it from the perspective of having learned and looked into these practices of necro-megalopolymancy and infernal geometry and architecture, etc. The city as a battery for spiritual forces. Without giving too much away, think of the stories about how Washington, D.C. is laid out to Masonic speculations, things like that. Now, think about what the purposes of that are. Why? Who does it benefit? Where's that power going, etc.? So, yeah, hopefully that's enough to kick up your appetite for what's coming next. I appreciate you guys listening. You're the fucking best. I love you all. Very much appreciate your listens, your likes, your comments, etc. Keep them coming. You guys are the best. I will see you on the next episode of Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, a podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht. You guys are the fucking best. Keep on rocking in the, I won't say free world, but decent layaway plan. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.